welcome back. We are going to talk about the handout Presupposition, Our Most Basic Belief. And this is a handout that's going to transition us into metaphysics. Remember, metaphysics is asking what is ultimate reality like? What is real? What is eternal? So this is a handout that's bridging us into that territory. So there are some concepts here we've gone over before, but you should take notes. There will be a few core questions from this handout, and I'll let you know when we get there. So let's go over this. I might have to switch over to the iPad to do some drawing again, but let's start here. Our most basic belief is about our most basic concept. Now remember, we've talked about basic beliefs before. We've talked about our world and life view, and how at the bottom is our epistemology, and we've just gone over a lot of epistemology, asking, how do I know? And now we're going to start looking at the foundation for our world and life view, which is asking the question, what is real? What is ultimate reality life? So our basic beliefs are about what is real, and I will show you that. And then the house is going to come up with ethics. So our most basic belief, meaning our most logically prior belief, is about our most basic concept. So remember, in the order of thinking, concepts come first. Concepts, judgments, arguments. So we're going to our fundamental idea. So logically, the most basic concept is that of existence. Now let's think about that. Here I'm holding in my hand an iPhone. What is the most basic thing you can say about this? I know you'll say, oh, it's technology, or oh, it's black, oh, it has glass, it can be used to look things up. Those things presuppose its existence. So the most basic thing we can say about a thing is that it exists. So logically, the most basic concept is that of existence. Existence means it bees, it is. And now there's two kinds of existence, and we've talked about this before. Existence is of two kinds. Temporal, which is with beginning or not always, and eternal, which is without beginning or always. We've talked about that. Now, in the order of these two concepts, eternal comes first. Eternal existence is prior, logically and ontologically, to temporal existence. So let's think about this for a second. If you were to ask, where did this come from? You'd probably have to go back to, well, I don't know, the Apple Store. Where'd that come from? Where did it come from before that? A factory in China. Where did that come from? The people who made it. And so we go back logically into the order of things, and we have to stop when we get to eternal, because eternal means it was always. So logically, our mind stops at eternal in the order of explaining things. You can't say, where did eternal come from? It didn't come from anywhere. It's always been there. Ontologically is in the order of being. So in the order of being, eternal being is logically prior to temporal being. So this iPhone is a temporal being. It came from somewhere. So in the order of being, eternal is prior to temporal. So explanation logically, being ontologically. So eternal is always, it comes first. It would not make sense to say, where did eternal come from? It didn't come from, it's always. We have a precise concept, but not an image of what eternal means. Now, philosophers may argue still about where did this concept come from. We might say we're born with it. It's a priori, before experience. It's not something we get from experience. It's prior to experience. And it comes from pairing with temporal. We have the idea of temporal things, and we have the idea of eternal things, or an eternal thing. So we have the concept, but you can't see it. Can you see eternal? No, it's not physical. Well, unless you want to say matter is eternal, but you still can't see the eternality of matter if it is. We have the idea of eternal. So it is a concept, and it is a concept not gotten from experience. You can't experience eternal. And philosophers would say that this is a priori, before experience. Or maybe it's innate, something we're born with. It's a category of thinking that we're born with. And we can say more about eternal. Now, I've talked about eternal and temporal. I should remind you that there's a category called everlasting, which belongs under temporal. Everlasting means it had a beginning and it goes on forever. But it definitely came into being. It started and it continues forever. That's different than this other concept. So eternal is not the same as everlasting. Eternal had no beginning. Everlasting had a beginning. And aveternal, which is a concept that has caused philosophers a lot of headaches over the centuries. Aveternal means it's eternal, no beginning and no end, and it's within time. We're going to find out that's not possible. It's a category mistake to say something is eternal and in time. And it's partly because the idea of eternal comes with the idea of infinite. Infinite is without limits. It's unlimited. So eternal and infinite are paired concepts. Finite and temporal are paired concepts. So if it's temporal, it's in time. We're going to find out infinite can't be in time, but I will give you the argument why, and I will show you how to think it through. It will hurt your head. This definitely will hurt your head. What is eternal? This is also some attributes of eternal. So whatever it is that's eternal, and we know that something must be eternal. I'll go over that argument again. What is eternal is independent. So eternal can't depend on something else. Otherwise, the other thing it depends on is eternal. Self-existing, it keeps itself going. It's the source of its own existence. Self-maintaining, meaning it doesn't die, it doesn't end, it doesn't start, it doesn't need something else to keep it going. It's self-maintaining, and it's self-explaining. You can't have something else pointing to the eternal, explaining the eternal. It is its own source of explanation. Why is this eternal? Because it's eternal. All right, so keep these in mind as we go through this unit on metaphysics, because whatever is eternal is independent, self-existing, self-maintaining, and self-explaining. That's a further definition of eternal. Now, here's why aveternal does not work. It's going to hurt your head, but stick with me. There are no unique events in an eternal being or process. So a unique event is you've had this being that's always, and then at some point something happened that didn't happen for all of eternity. Maybe I should draw. Let's go to the iPad. All right, so I'm going to draw two examples. One is pretend your soul is eternal, no beginning, no end, and you're going through a process of reincarnation. This is my image of a cycle. Birth, death, rebirth, birth, death, rebirth, for always. So this is in an eternal cycle, okay, of birth, death, and rebirth. Now, sometimes those who hold to the theory of reincarnation talk about enlightenment or nirvana or reaching a higher plane of reality. So that would be an example of a unique event. You've been going through this process forever, always, no beginning and no end, and then at one point you have this experience. There are going to be several problems with that view of reincarnation. We'll look at it when we get into spiritual monism, but this would count as a unique event. Why didn't it happen sooner? Why didn't it happen here? And if it happens once, how come it doesn't happen always if it's eternal? So problems with this idea of a unique event. Another example is let's say the universe is eternal, the material world, no beginning, no end, then how is it that things are running down? And we talk about a heat death. So then we have to make a cycle. So we have to say, well, then the universe is always, and it's going through a cycle of maybe big bangs and big crunches forever. Okay, we'll have to see, okay, if the universe is doing that, do we have empirical evidence for that? Can we see it? Can we observe it? And if not, then what? So we'll look at that view that the universe is going through a cycle. And that would mean if it's going through a cycle, then it can't end. The cycle can't end and the cycle can't begin. But what if we find evidence for the beginning of the universe or the end of the universe? Then we'll have to see maybe that theory is not going to work on several levels. For one, no unique events. And for two, maybe there's something about matter that it doesn't, it's not self-maintaining. Okay, let's go back to the handout. Looks like portions of my handout might be getting cut off here. Let me see if I can fix that. Okay. So we are talking about this. There are no unique events in an eternal being or process. If there were an infinite amount of time, it could not be explained why a unique event did not happen before it did. So again, you've had an infinite amount of time to reach this level of enlightenment, and you haven't reached it yet. So maybe it's not an infinite cycle. If there were an infinite amount of time, it couldn't be explained why a unique event did not happen before it did. Secondly, how can a unique event happen at all in an eternal, infinite series? So sometimes philosophers get hung up on this problem. One example I will send you to do a little research on the internet. Go look up Zeno's paradoxes. Zeno was a pre-Socratic philosopher who was getting stuck in this kind of problem when he was thinking about a line. Let me go back to the iPad and show you some things. So a line is supposedly infinite in both directions, right? That's how we symbolize it. Infinite, no beginning and no end. And then we talk about, I think, line segment. That wasn't right. Here, let me try this. That's finite, right? It had a beginning. But Zeno was thinking about lines, and if this line, our theory about numbers and lines is infinite, right? So theoretically, you can chop this in half and this portion is still infinite, right? And you can chop this in half and this portion is still infinite. And so he got into paradoxes and thought that maybe motion was impossible if this is the case. He gives an example of Achilles, who is supposedly a fast runner. Do you guys know the story of Achilles? Anyways, he is in a race with a tortoise. I'm going to try to draw Achilles in a race with a tortoise. Now this is him running because he's fast. And the tortoise gets a head start in this story because tortoises are slow, right? So he's got little legs and he's slow. Now the theory is that as the tortoise moves ahead, little by little, Achilles also has to catch up to the tortoise. But also remember, we're talking about lines and distance. So Zeno gets into his paradox because there's an infinite distance for Achilles to cross to catch up to that tortoise. And if you were to cut that distance in half, there's still an infinite distance for him to cross. Cut it in half again, there's still an infinite distance. So Achilles could never catch up to the tortoise. The tortoise is still moving forward too. So he gets into this paradox about distance, about numbers and lines, and we talk about infinity. We express infinity like this. So is the number line actually infinite? That's the question, right? And there's a video out there on a philosopher. Actually, he's a mathematician, but he does some philosophy. His name is Hilbert, and his example is called Hilbert's Hotel. I'll try to put a link up to the video. It's mind-boggling, but it's a video that goes over the problem of actual infinite. So he imagines this hotel that has an infinite number of rooms, and there are an infinite number of guests checking in and out of this hotel, and the problems that that leads to. And so while we can conceive of infinite, we have the idea of it. For there to be an actual infinite in the physical world, that's not possible. So that's part of what this problem is dealing with. In the background, there are philosophical problems when you combine infinite and eternal with finite and temporal, particularly infinite time. Those two lead to problems. So let's look at the rest of this handout. An infinite series, perhaps like time or the number line, cannot be crossed in finite time. That was the example of Achilles. So an infinite series of points on the number line or moments in time can't be crossed in finite time. Finite time is moment by moment. So let's say you have an infinite series of events. You cannot cross it in infinite time. You can't have an infinite series crossed in finite time. There cannot be an infinite series of moments or points, since what is infinite is indivisible. So think of it this way. If it's infinite, there's an infinite number of divisions to make. It's impossible to divide infinite. But time is divisible. So let's go back to the iPad for a moment. If it's infinite, then it's indivisible. Cannot be divided up. But if it's time, then it's divisible. So what does that mean? You cannot have infinite time. It's not possible. So that's a negation sign. This is a contradiction. Infinite time is a contradiction. So if it's time, it's finite. So there cannot be an infinite series, since what is infinite is indivisible. Since time is divisible, time must not be an infinite series. So your view of time is dependent upon your view of what is eternal. And we're going to see that different views of eternal have different ways of conceiving time. And those who say everything is eternal are going to have to deal with this problem, particularly spiritual monism, with the problem of reincarnation and the problem of time. They're going to make the move to say time itself is not real. Time is an illusion. So that's one way to deal with the problem. Material monism is going to have another problem. They're going to have to say there's finite time within an infinite series. So we'll see if that works. Theism, time begins when finite things come to be. So time is an aspect of the created order. So each view that we look at will have a different conception of time. Okay, that probably hurt your head a little bit, but you're patient and I'm grateful. So I'm going to say, think this through, recognize time is a concept that is connected to our view of metaphysics, and we'll have to think about time in each view that we go over. Next time, I'm going to review there must be something eternal, and we're going to look at the square of opposition, and then we're going to start looking at the different positions in metaphysics and see what are our logical options in metaphysics. All right, I'll see you in the next video.